been a tough 12 months. We've had a recession, pandemic, 3 lockdowns, stop, start. But now, at last, the government has published a roadmap, and we have a roadmap for the 4 nations. But that probably creates more questions than anything else on strategy, managing crisis, fundraising and how it will look in the future, career development, messaging of our charities, and what it's like to be a trustee and being a trustee. We're delighted today to have Jo Swinhoe here today, who is Director of Income Generation, Fundraising and Engagement at NSPCC, and she will be taking questions and answering many of the questions that you have. On behalf of the Chartered Institute of Fundraising, South East London region, I'd like to welcome you here this morning. I'm Neil Kennedy, Vice Chair of the committee. The Chartered Institute of Fundraising, as the recognised membership body for fundraising in the United Kingdom, has the purpose of excellence in fundraising through training, education and networking to serve our communities better both now and in the future. It's a pleasure again to thank the First Thursday team who produce, organise, plan the whole year's sessions of these First Thursday events. I think we have a slide. Do we have the team? Yes, there we go. Julie, Vicky, Stephen, Mike and Paul. We're doing a slightly different session today. As you'll find, it's a question and answer session, and we asked for the very first time pre-sending of questions, and many of you have done so, and Jo will be answering those. But that still doesn't preclude you from using the Q&A function. So please do that. We will try to answer these within the session if there's time, or perhaps afterwards. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Eden Brown, who would be delighted to help you, either recruiting on behalf of your organisation or indeed helping you with your own careers. We want to help one another, and during these very difficult times, it's important that we support as many fundraisers as possible. So we're offering this first year's membership with a discount of £44 to join the Institute. The code for that is LDN/group, and you will see that at the end on the closing card. Please tweet us if you can. It's hashtag CIOF Thursday. Again, that'll be on the card. And tag us at hashtag CIOFSE London. We will be recording this session, so if you wish to anonymise, please do so. As I say, it's a unique session. Please use question, and it gives me now great pleasure to hand you over to Jo Swinhoe to answer your questions and Stephen to facilitate. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Before we get into the Q&A, I just want to say how lovely it is to be back with you all again. I hope you and yours are all well, and that life is beginning to take a little bit more of a sunshine approach. Certainly it's sunny here in London, and welcome to my bedroom, study, music room, art place, dumping ground, where I've been working for the last year. So I'm going to try and keep the answers quite brief today, because we've had a lot of really super questions, and I know that you will have other questions as well during the session, and I'd like to get through as many as possible. So if we don't, or if I don't answer it in as full a way as you'd like, do feel free to reach out to me. It's josephine.swinhoe@nspcc.org.uk. I'm not on Twitter, don't look for me. And that my direct email is the best way to ask further follow-ups. What I won't do is highlight any particular agencies. And the reason for that is I think agencies are best chosen by the charities that they work for, and one agency doesn't suit all. And I will, wherever possible, try to give an example. So thank you very much. Over to the first question.
Thank you very much, Jo. So the first question, not sure who this particular person is, but as the fundraising manager of a small charity and the sole fundraiser, my fundraising knowledge is quite general. I would like to take the next step in my career, but I am struggling to know how to do this without moving sideways or backwards. Do you have any suggestions or advice, please?
I do. It's exactly where I started. So I'm with you on that journey. I started as a sole fundraiser and fundraising manager for Worlow Hall Farm in Sheffield. And well done you, because it's a responsibility to be the sole fundraiser in a smaller organisation or any size of organisation. And the question really you need to ask yourself, is what do you need to live on? Because inevitably you may have had a salary which couldn't be replicated if you went into another charity. So I think the first thing is to decide how much you need to earn, because that keeps us all in clothes and bread and butter. My advice would be, if you've been a generalist, that community fundraising is a great place to go. That's certainly where I went. However, if you know that you're already more interested in, say, corporate fundraising or regular giving or lottery type activity, then by all means focus on that first. The advantage of going into something like community fundraising is quite broad based, and you'll find that you will grow certain skills. And I never worked outside of that in any other specialism. So it isn't necessary to be a specialist in any other area or vice versa for you to get to the top job. You just have to be aware, you have to learn, and do use the Institute to both guide you for career opportunities, but also to learn about other income streams so that you can talk knowledgeably when you go to an interview. I don't know that I did much going backwards, but I certainly did a few sideways moves for a couple of years to gain experience and then progressed again. But I only ever worked in 3 charities. So my advice would be, work out how much you need to live, look for a cause that is interesting and that you're passionate about, and then look for the jobs that are available, and don't worry too much about whether you're closing or going in as a generalist, because you can address that as you go further up your career ladder. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. Next question, there's a couple of parts of this, Jo, so let me know if you want me to repeat it, but in relation to COVID. So how do you look ahead while dealing with the immediate impact of COVID-19, particularly through the lens of strategy and developing a long-term multi-year grant/partnership? So which areas of fundraising do you think will see the greatest growth over the next 5 years, bearing in mind the context of the pandemic and recession? And the next part of that question is, what do you think will be the impact of COVID in regards to things like no face-to-face meetings, no live events for a year, etc., on fundraising incomes for major donors this year and going forward?
Okay, so it's kind of COVID-y question. Well, let me wrap all that up together. It's impacted all of us in so many ways. And as an income generator fundraiser, my advice would be absolutely to look at your income streams that have performed well, because for many charities, there has been exceptional performance in some income streams. Some major donors have been able to be significantly more generous than before. If they've had big bonuses, now is the month to be asking them to be more generous as well. But I think starting at the beginning of the ahead and now, it's the same dilemma we have all the time as fundraising managers and decision makers. You need to keep an eye on the future and be horizon scanning. What's new in your type of fundraising? What's happening in your organization? What is the world outside saying about your cause? If you're working in environmental charities at the moment, then younger people are much more inclined to be interested and want to give time. But unfortunately, they don't always have the money because they may be prioritizing home, family, further education, all completely understandable. But you can gain their support to turn them into donors later. So never ignore anybody. And I think for myself, I try to find time to step back from the day-to-day work. Perhaps not so much in this job, because at this level, I am generally thinking strategically all the time, and I'm horizon scanning and looking for opportunities. But say at senior management, middle management, I would try to take time out, and I would block that in my diary. Now it's electronic, but when I was working on a paper diary, I would simply say that I wasn't available. And yes, sometimes it might be a walk in the park, and I think sometimes it would be reading lots of articles. Very often it was going to Institute of Fundraising events or picking the brains of people I'd met at networking events. And so you do this sort of event, you know, future now. So you don't take your eye off the ball of what's happening today, but you're always trying to look forward. And I would say don't try to jump forward. Dave Brailsford, who is a fantastic Sky cycling coach, although possibly might be involved in something unpleasant, but he was only looking for small incremental changes all the time, you know, losing a couple of ounces on a bike at a time. And that's how his team became world champions. They weren't trying to make great strides of improvement all the time, constantly looking at what you do and re-engineering it for the future. The areas of growth, I think, post-COVID will be different for every charity. And that's because our donor bases are not all the same. So that's why I said reflect on what has happened well for you and build on that and excite those donors and remind them how they have helped you continue your services during the pandemic. Doesn't matter whether those services are delivered in this country, whether they're an immediate impact of COVID, such as children for the NSPCC, or whether you work in overseas development. If your donors have stayed with you, then you want to keep them warm and you want to remind them how valuable they are to you. So focus on those. I think because of the likelihood of an economic recession of some depth in the next 5 to 10 years, the money that some trusts and foundations are able to give us may be less, because remember that they tend to rely on investments which go up as well as down. So some trusts and foundations may not be able to give as much as they have in the future, but that will not be a blanket for everybody. I do think that when people come out into the streets again, that they will be really interested in talking to people about causes. So I do think there's a place for whatever face-to-face activity you can do, whether that's putting on events that people can attend as information and engagement events for supporters and donors, or whether it's engaging your regular donors through street fundraising or venue experiential fundraising. I think lastly, and this is a huge topic, one could do an entire hour or several hours on this, but lastly, I would say I think the impact on COVID for everybody is something that we have to think of in terms of walking in your donor's shoes, which I would advocate all the time. So just try to think about your donor segments. What are they experiencing? So major donors who are working in the banking, insurance, PPE industry, they will have done really well in the last year, and they will be generous if you ask them in the right way. But major donors who perhaps earn money from services, entertainment, the theatres, they are unlikely to have done so well. So think about that before you approach them and recognise the impact it's having. And for our regular givers, it's no different. If you have people who support you or who are generally working in entertainment, education, or more of a kind of gig, lower economy type activity, they may not have the money. They may not have the money at all to, you know, to give to you. So be aware of that, and remember to ask in the context of available money.
Fantastic, thank you, Jo. And the next question actually follows on quite nicely from that, Jo. So if you were someone from a medium-sized charity, you're currently preliminarily funded by grants, but looking to diversify your income and grow over the next 5 years, what are those key income streams that you might be investing in now, and how much investment would you be putting into particular areas?
Jo Saxton wrote an interesting blog recently about fundraising versus income generation. And I think that is something worthy of consideration by all charities. So fundraising is voluntary donations, and it's what we are all expert in one way or another. And income generation is taking what we do and monetizing it. So what knowledge do we have? What services do we provide that we could provide elsewhere? What could we provide on license? There's no tricks to it. It's simply a process of commercialization. So in any charity, whether it's medium-sized, small or large, I think there is a space to be beginning to talk inside about how you might achieve that. So that's my first point. The second is, if you're currently grant-based, then to a fairly large degree, that tends to be quite stable. If a grant maker likes what you do and you've got a good relationship with them, then you can rely on future years. But it is also quite binary. So if you get a large grant of £100,000 and it doesn't come in, that's a large hole to fill. So I think it's great that you're beginning to think about how else can we fundraise. And I would look at each individual income stream does corporate work for your cause? Without knowing the detail of the cause, it's quite hard for me to assist, but it's a general question. Would companies like to support what we do? And if so, what companies are most likely to want to support us quickest? And then have a short list of, say, 10 or 15. Look to see when their application processes come out for a company, Charity of the Year. Talk to them before that to say, this is what we do. Is that sort of interesting? What's your CSR agenda? Because if you look at something on paper, then you may see that they're really interested in, I don't know, children's education. But in the background, they're about to change that and they're going to go and work in the environment. So do take time to phone up and ask. And I think the other thing about trusts, which I heard today from the guys on the Thursday Club, is that in a couple of months' time, they're having a session entirely on trusts and foundations. So if that's an area that you're interested in either expanding or knowing more about the COVID impact, then I would definitely sign up for that. Because that will give you a little bit more of specific insight around the trusts and foundations. So look at what you do as a charity, look at which income streams are most likely to respond to that. Investment in regular giving is very expensive upfront with a return over many years, so that may not be a great place to start. Running your own lottery is a good idea, but it is an investment upfront and you do need to have quite a lot of due diligence and regulatory adherence. So it can be expensive as a start off, but it can work very well. And if you work in a local community, then getting those people engaged in what you do would be absolutely where I would go first. But if you're good at trusts and foundations, I think major donors is the natural next best space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. And could we get some of your practical tips for creating a fundraising strategy, please?
Yeah, I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record, really, because I am a very, very simple person when it comes to developing business. Who are your donors now, and what is your cause? Look at that together, and where are the gaps? So if you've got a lot of money coming in from trusts and foundations, as we just heard, that says to me that you can build great cases for large investment delivering good impact, because otherwise the trusts and foundations wouldn't speak to you. And generally major donors like that. So that's obviously something where you could expand out to. If you look at all the different income streams for voluntary income, regular donors, which also means sustaining your regular donors, so it's support or development as well as bringing them in the first place. Your major giving, trusts and foundations often goes alongside of that. Companies, local and national. Government, are you likely to get any government grants for what you do? Special events and mass participation. So there's maybe 6 or 7 different income streams, and take them all one by one. Talk to people if you don't do them already. Find out a little bit more about them. Think about your donor, walk in their shoes. Would they want to do any of these things that I've just described? Are there new donors that would want to do those things, and you could bring them in, because that obviously is their nirvana. And start small. So try out a mass participation event. Think about engaging or buying 20 places, or really max out in one geographical area so that you get lots of participants in the Edinburgh Marathon, and see how that goes and whether you get a good return on investment. You don't need to do everything all at once. When I was working at Worlow Hall Farm, we did trusts and foundations, we did local government, we did companies, and we sold stuff, mugs with pictures of cows and things on them, because that's where we could get our money. We couldn't attack the regular giving market in Sheffield. It was too hard to penetrate, but companies liked it because we were working with children from across the city and introducing farming. So if I was working there now, I would be thinking of the cooperative, for example, or Tesco, who have local funds to give away. So when you're starting from scratch on a strategy, think of every income stream and how applicable it is. Think of your messaging and make sure that you're expressing the need for your beneficiaries and not the charity, because that's in the relevance. You want people to feel something, and then you go to head, heart, and wallet. Make people think about what you do, make them care about what you do, and make them want to act by giving. Just keep it simple.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. Some more top tips here. What would be your key top tips for someone in their first trustee position?
That's great. I'm so pleased some of you are either trustees or thinking about it. And as fundraisers, we do tend to be in demand to go to other charities because we bring with us the experience of raising money. The first thing is to remember that you are not doing the fundraising and that you're on the trustee board as a group of people whose first responsibility is to make sure that the charity fulfills its fiduciary duty. We have enough money to do what we want to do. We are planning for the future. We will not go to the wall if money drops over a couple of months. So the first thing is fiduciary duty means that you can be an expert in fundraising and you can look at their strategy and you can advise on that and you can give them tips. You can even make introductions if that's appropriate, but you don't do it. So I've been a trustee or a non-executive director, and I've been both and sometimes all at the same time. So sometimes on commercial companies and sometimes on charities. I'm currently a trustee of the Royal Voluntary Service, which I absolutely adore, and they've done a stunning job over the vaxing, the jab army, I think as described by the Sun. And they have always worked in the community and they've always been really volunteer engaged, which is why I wanted to be a trustee of them. So assuming that you're making a choice based on something you're interested in, then you'll bring some other interests and thoughts to it. That's important. Make sure you can see their strategy, that you understand it, and that you speak from a position of evidence. Opinion is useful, and I do give opinion if I can't find the evidence, but I always say I can't give you the evidence, but this is my opinion. And take a collective decision. So you will be, with your other trustees, expected to make decisions on pay policy, on home working policy, on privacy, on all sorts of things. And it is a great way to learn how an organisation operates. And that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to become trustees of charities. Many young parents start by becoming school governors. That is not something I ever did. And I think it is a great thing to do, but it's really time consuming. So I'm kind of pro, and also one has to be realistic because schools are operating in a highly safeguarded and situation with vulnerable children. Any children to an extent is vulnerable once it's away from its parents and in a group of other people and children. So I'm not just talking about the children who are vulnerable by nature of their background or their abilities or health issues, things like that. So it's a huge responsibility. And I would suggest that if you want to be a trustee, starting with a small to medium-sized charity that you're really interested in would be a great place to start. But well done. Hope that's helpful.
Fantastic, thank you, Jo. And this question actually moves nicely on from the organisation where you're a trustee, actually. So do you have any information specifically to help small charities run by volunteers themselves? So any information that you could give for a really tiny charity where they have no national capacity, no branding, no patrons, right from the start, it would seem.
Yeah, well, a great place to start. It does take me back to the beginning of my career. I'm going to make an assumption here, which I think will be fair, is that a small local charity with no national reach, no great brand, and no patrons is working in a community of some sort. It could be a community of cat lovers, or it could be a physical community in a particular area of a city or town or village. So the first people that will care about what you do are those people who are geographically close to you or close to your cause. As a group of volunteers, reaching out through those volunteers, one volunteer asks another two people, could you help? Could you find someone to do X? Can you take part in? Would you like to sign up? So building a register with appropriate permissions of people who would be interested, so that you grow from your small group of 6 or 10 or 12 people who are working on it now to say, if everybody got 2, would that be about 75? Or is that, my maths is bad. My arithmetic is appalling. My maths is great. My arithmetic is bad. But if you all ask 2 or 3 people, you can get more folk together and then divide them into what their interests are and then subgroup them. So each group of volunteers is working on something different. And then occasionally you come together with your management committee or whatever it was. And And do try to find people who are fundraisers who would be willing to write grant applications to particularly to local councils and local grant givers who are only interested in giving to your cause, your community of interest, or your geographical community, because that's where you will get the most benefit. And there is no reason at all why you need to have staff employed if you can do what you can do as volunteers. But I would really strongly recommend that you're serious about taking expenses, about traveling to and from, about coffees and teas, because otherwise it kind of isn't really a charity. It's something that everybody's giving lots to, but isn't gaining a stable, realistic position of what it costs to run the charity. And the other thing I would do if I was only working with volunteers is to find out how many contacts they've got in companies who would be willing to do a small thing. It can be a big sale for £50 or £100, but that could make a massive difference to a small charity. And remember the usual rules of thanking, and thanking again, and heart, mind, and action. And if you can stick to those and spread out your network of interest or geographical network, I think you'll begin to see some difference. Good luck.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jo. And next one moves on to around regular giving. So someone's interested in kind of, I think, your approach towards that and what your recommendation would be. So how to reignite and start recruiting regular supporters and patrons. What would be your advice around that, please?
Just before I go on my screen, I've got messages coming up from a meeting in the NSPCC that I'm not at. So if you are seeing those messages, I do apologise. I will try to switch them off quite quickly. Don't think there's anything too confidential. It's just about an event we're running next year. And I'm definitely logged out of the meeting, so I have no idea why they're still coming. Don't worry, we can't see anything. Fabulous. I'll ignore them then.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's happening? So regular, just repeat it so that I do answer the question.
So what is your approach, or what would your advice be around reigniting and recruiting regular supporters and patrons at the moment?
Okay. The general one of reigniting supporters, and I'll separate supporters from patrons, is think about what the supporters have responded to in the past. So what evidence do you have, hopefully some, of they've been particularly interested in this particular part of the work, or that particular part of the world, or this particular geography, or even perhaps a letter that was signed by a particular person in the organisation. So try to understand what has engaged them, because that will tell you what the motivations of that group of supporters is. And it does, if you've got 100, you should be able to divide them into smallish groups. You won't get 100 separate opinions. There will be some commonality. So try to look at segmenting those donors first of all. And if you've already done that, that's fantastic. Think now about what COVID means to the cause. Is it impacted? Is it worse? Has it got better? Have things improved for your beneficiaries? I'm not thinking that might be many people in COVID, but I'm going to say it anyway, and hopefully there are some. If you're working in a local community, either here or abroad, then just describe it, describe the challenges that community has. And I would really like to suggest that there is quite a lot of testing now, because what worked pre-COVID may not necessarily work post-COVID. So levels of giving, different ways of approaching the same issue. Can you put the story first and the ask after? Remember that we all want to engage the hearts and minds first before we ask for the money. So some people will be engaged by a picture, some people by a video if you're on social media, some people by the story, some people by a stat. So remember that people respond left brain, right brain, hearts and minds. So you've got to kind of quadrant out the different ways that you approach your supporter base, and look for more of the same. Where are these people? Where can you find more people like them? Do they all buy a particular type of product? If you're in conservation charities or environmental, one could imagine, and please forgive me, I don't mean to be, well, just forgive me if this lands badly, but would people who care more about the environment be likely to have different dietary profiles to those people who support the NSPCC. We've never looked at anybody by dietary profile. If I was working in an environment charity, I would be. And I would think about those people and what they want out of their lives and how I can reach them through talking about my cause and making my cause important to them. The issue about, so is there anything else I want to say about that? I think the other thing is going back very clearly to say what during COVID has been the impact on the people that you've been working with. So it could be that nobody has been able to reach those people, that the normal service hasn't been possible to have been run because we've been socially distanced, we haven't been able to travel abroad, all sorts of different things. Make that really clear, that if you had a problem a year ago, you've got a bigger problem now because there's been a year of absence of the service that you just couldn't deliver. So you need to do more of it, and therefore their support is more important than ever. In terms of patrons, and this applies slightly to the small volunteer-led charity, and I meant to say it at the time, is a patron can be incredibly useful and powerful if they are influential on your donor group. But having a patron for a patron's sake is not really very respectful to that person. Many charities have royal patronage because that goes back over hundreds of years, and it was important that a charity had a royal patron. And we have a very active patron at the NSPCC with the Duchess of Wessex. Have I got that right? Sophie.
She's
Sophie.
Wessex. I think so.
Sophie the Duchess, she's fantastic. She's very active. She comes into our child line, she answers shift calls. I mean, it's just amazing. She's really, really super. And you want a patron to do these things for you, to be seen to be doing. So if you want to engage patrons, are they people who are famous in what you do? If you're a cat charity, are they well known for their veterinary expertise in cats? Because that would be quite interesting. If I was a major cat lover and you were looking after cats, I would go, oh, that's really interesting. He knows what he's doing. That's a good patron to have. If it's somebody who's well known for their love of cats, then equally that would be interesting because I share with that patron a love of cats. So I think that's where a patron can be useful, but do be respectful and don't just go to a patron or think that you need one because they're a name, because that won't work for either of you. And the profile that a local patron can have, perhaps the captain of the local Sunday League football team, will be far well known, better known locally and much more used to you than Michael Palin, because he's never going to turn up. Does that make sense? I hope it does.
Fantastic. No, that was really brilliant, Jo. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Moving on to someone who's moving into the freelance world now. So I'm just starting out as a freelance fundraiser. So I'd be very interested in the topics of how to connect with potential clients, especially if ideally one wanted to carve out a specific niche and target certain clients to achieve that.
Okay, so possibly not my strength, because as you've just heard in my introduction, when I did go freelance, I was working elsewhere and I only took jobs that were interesting to me. And I don't think that would have kept me in bread and butter. So these are my suggestions, and what I know from well-known consultants and how they started is they would start with people who they knew and they had worked with and that they knew respected the type of work they did. And they asked them, do you have any jobs in this area? This is what I'm trying to develop. You might do one or two pieces at a very low rate or at no rate, but don't do too many of those. Build up a reputation, ask for testimonials. And if you feel that your skills are very unique and you can see where you can add value to a number of charities, then approach them directly. If you don't know them, it is more difficult. So I would suggest that trying to find someone to introduce you to them. And I've done that for people who I've worked with before in the NSPCC who went freelance. I would make an introduction or I would endorse an approach that they were making. Because I knew that they would do a good job, and you know, and why not? You would do that for people. It's not a difficult thing to do. So think about who you know, think about who knows your work, and try to join the two together. That would be the advice that I can offer. And you know what? I think the other thing is to ask other freelancers how they got going. we are the very oddest sector in the world, and many people will have heard me say this before, is we share our secrets so openly with each other. It's no wonder any of us, still raise money. But I do think that if you reach out to, people and say, I'm starting, what would be your top tips? I think they would probably give you a cup of coffee time.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. So next question, again, from some charity that has not disclosed, but we are in the preliminary stages of planning a big capital repair programme. The last one was back in 2001 to 2004 and was supported by the Fundraising Advisory Board of Connections, who advised on fundraising elements and provided essential strategic guidance, supported by a previous director who was very switched on and supportive to fundraising. However, this was nearly 20 years ago. What are the key skills these individuals should now possess 20 years on, which would provide the benefit and relevance to current trustees and senior leaders?
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating topic. I think you could run another session entirely on this, but you wouldn't have me up here in the seat talking about it. It's really interesting, I think, the whole major appeal world coming forward. So what would I suggest? I think a fundraising advisory board is good if they're going to give. I'm a bit of an American-minded person on this respect, is that 20 years ago and before that, people would be on advisory boards and major appeal committees because they saw some social benefit and they wanted to be seen to be doing the right thing. I think the society has changed. People want to do the right thing more than they want to be seen to be doing the right thing. And I'm not suggesting that people on major appeal committees or fundraising boards need to give large gifts, but I do think if they are preparing to ask for other people and organizations for money, they should give something, and that could be proportionate to their wealth, or they could decide to set up a small regular donation. It doesn't matter. They have to go through the art of giving to show that they are committed to what they're talking about. Otherwise, they are a mouthpiece rather than somebody who is truly working for you. If I have offended anybody, I apologize, but that is my professional and personal opinion. The components of your board: a chair who is passionate and can persuade other people, a good persuasive, almost like a salesman type of person, and who has some standing amongst the people and organizations with whom you're going to be interacting. If it was a health charity, it doesn't need to be the very best doctor in your sphere, because they may not be actually very good at talking about what they do, but they're probably brilliant at doing it. But that person, as a doctor, may be really wanting something to happen and would be prepared to sit on the committee and talk about the need. So you need to have experts in what's happening. I would be trying to cover a number of sectors on the board because I think that's great. You get further reach out. Whether the traditional model will work for the future remains to be seen. I think a board of trustees and your executive board will want to see that whatever you're doing has been thought through. And I haven't seen a better model than a giving pyramid, with 1 or 2 lead gifts from foundations or government, if that's appropriate. Perhaps matched funding from the charities reserves could be interesting, or matched funding from corporate partners, and building that up to show that whatever your overall target is, that you can achieve it by the small gifts, the medium-sized gifts, and the large gifts. And there is a continual argument, and I'm on both sides of these sometimes, about whether one should go public early or have this private phase until 1/3 or 2/3 of your money has been raised. I think you've got to decide what's right for you. Because we have been in lockdown and absent from our donors, physically quite a lot for the last year, it could be that you think the time is right to go really public. It could be that whatever you're trying to improve for the capital, I'm assuming it's kind of buildings of some description, or perhaps collected art. If that's really important to people, then maybe it's better to go early. But I wouldn't go early on a completely empty bank account. I would certainly be looking to have people tied into what you want to do, to have a clear strategy, to engage your chair, and then to allow the chair to engage the people who are going to sit around the table. And I wouldn't have a large one. I wouldn't be up in the 20s. I would be looking for 7 or 8 people who are really going to work hard for 2 or 3 years to reach out through their connections. So that would be where I am now. But I really would like to follow the progress of that one, because there hasn't been a really big capital appeal post-COVID, so it could be the first one.
Brilliant. We'll try and find out who that was from, Jo, and keep in
Thank
touch. So next question, what is the best way to increase income for fundraising events under a very tight budget?
I think it's got to be gifts in kind. So you're paying for as little as possible. That you can find people who care about your cause sufficiently and who also happen to own a marquee company. And there may be some cost. Remember that you need a contract with people. So you may have to carry some cost just to make sure that the risk is properly addressed. But I would be definitely saying that, and getting as much as possible sponsored. So if you're having a drinks reception, then try and get that covered by the local wine merchant or national wine merchant if you're a national charity, or the connection of somebody who happens to know somebody, or even a company who's not connected with you directly, but who knows somebody who's on the events committee. If you run a very tight budget, the other thing that one has to think about is whether or not celebrities will add value to your event. They have to earn a living, and actually, despite what we think, they don't earn a lot of money. You know, we might see them on our tellies for a season of such and such a program, but the rest of the time they're not working, or they're doing voiceovers or hand adverts. And you know, the very, very few earn a great deal of money. So we do have to be respectful of our celebrities and not expect them to do everything for nothing. But they may take a reduced fee, and that's best negotiated through an agent. If you can't think of any reason why a celebrity would encourage more people to buy tables, don't have one. Just get somebody who's got personality rather than is a personality. And again, it could be the local Sunday League football club, you know, captain who's maybe a great stand-up comic in his spare time and who could really host your event and bring it to life, because people just want to have a great time. And that doesn't mean to say that somebody who's famous, I'm not going to pick on poor Mr. Palin again because he's marvelous, but somebody who's famous doesn't necessarily have the right skills to do what you want them to do. So look for sponsorship to cover what you want to happen. Look for hiring, not buying. So you can hire, you know, table centerpieces and things like that at a much lesser price than you would need to purchase. Look for making up a program where people have taken adverts where they're having their sponsor reflected. Try to get every single bit of your event free. But remember that there will be some things you have to pay for because of the insurance risk, and never skimp on insurance.
Brilliant, thank you, Jo.
I am not paid by any insurance company. bitter words spoken from experience.
So next question is someone who is looking at ways to improve the transfer of engagement in social media to become supporters. So I think what they mean there is anyone that's been engaging on that social media platform to then transfer into supporters. What are the metrics that other charities are using to monitor their digital effectiveness? So they have a very, very small comms team. So any tricks of the trade for small charities would be great.
I just want to remind everybody out there that I started work in the charity sector not long after the internet was put up. Okay, so that we're contextualizing my experience of digital here. Right. Right. I think it comes back again to knowing your cause and knowing the supporters, because people who engage on social media are often engaging in lots of activity at the same time. They may be interested in following fashion or causes or a particular person because they like the way they speak and write about things, or they're very motivational. So they will have very often quite a broad spectrum of engagement. And if they are responding to what you're putting out on social media, then at least you have got the interest, yeah, you've got the mind or you've got the heart a little bit, but you need to build on that. So can you remarket to that person to bring them even closer in? Can you give them a little bit more of an insight? Can you get somebody to come from the social media platform to perhaps your website, where you can expand on the information, since social media tends to be quite brief? Can you measure how your links are working in the social media back to where you're going onto your website? In terms of the metrics, I think you have to know what you're trying to achieve. If you simply want to raise awareness of your brand, then how many people are clicking on? How long are they staying on that? Are they sharing it? These are reasonable metrics for a brand to think, that's good, I'm getting reach. My one contact has shared that with 25 more. So those are fairly basic metrics. But if you want to translate them into people who give money, which is what our job is all about, you might be wanting to test more on your messaging, so that the social media that goes out is not just about what you do. Look, we help people with cancer. Actually, it's we can't help enough people with cancer. So you're putting the need a little bit more up front, and that you're drawing them into a supporter journey, which is about raising money and getting money from them, rather than just engaging them in the broader work of the charity. Test, test, and test again. So different pictures, different words, pictures, words. Video works fantastically. Don't make it long. Anything between 4 and 15 seconds is fine. You know, there isn't any need to kind of labor the point on any of these things, because when you've captured their interest and then you've got them into the website, you need to be asking for permissions to recontact them, and then you bring them into your donor journey, which of course is a really big part of your regular giving, your acquisition, your retention. And it doesn't matter whether somebody comes in from social media, whether they come in from you know, landing on the web page because you've done a campaign in some particular way and, you know, done a door drop. Those things perhaps do exist, and sometimes they work really well. So you have to think about what your cause is and what type of donors you are looking for. Social media may not be the best place to be. And if you have a small comms team, just work together to say, actually, what are our priorities? In the NSPCC, we have a very large comms team, although I'm told by our comms team that it's not big enough. But hey, we all say that, don't we? But we have agreed what the priorities are for next year. And top of that list is income generation, because we can't do anything else if we don't raise money. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be talking about our NSPCC learning or any other things that we do. Is just that it allows, sorry, I got slightly distracted by a question that popped up in front of me. I completely lost my train of thought. Can't remember. Oh, yes, it was about digital effectiveness. So working with your comms team is about making sure you have clear priorities together and that you're not tugging against folk. And there will be times when your comms team says, you know what, we can't do that for fundraising and income gen because we're having a conference and that's what we've got to focus on. So plan out as far into the year as you can about where your slots are, and then ask for the whole weight of your comms team, small or large, to work with you on it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. So you've touched on this a little bit actually, Jo, but what are your thoughts on the future landscape of grant giving organisations?
Yeah, I think I'm going to sign in 2 weeks' time and find the answer, to be perfectly honest. I do think it's very economy based. Because some grants will, and some grant givers and foundations will do very well, and some will do not so well. So I do think we've got to be even better at feeding back and doing the impact reports, interim impact reports. If they want 3, give them 4, give them more than they want, because if you're giving them an experience which is over and above what they had expected, or there's a little add-on that adds some depth to the report that they hadn't thought to ask, then you're more likely to be given more in the future. The long term on grants and foundations, I don't know. And I'm curious about it because of things like the budget and how that affects individuals giving money into family foundations, and indeed whether those family foundations will exist in the future if money becomes tight for what we might have called some of our traditional family foundations.
And bearing that in mind, Jo, how do you think you might develop a strategy around grant applications at the moment?
Sorry, I keep looking at these questions down there. Sorry, I'm just going to, somebody's asked about one from working from home, so I'll let you pick that up. Could you just say that question again?
Yes, bearing that in mind around the landscape of grant organisations, what do you think the best way to develop, or the best approach towards developing a strategy just for grant applications would be at the moment?
The best strategy, know what you want to achieve that you're going to do for a number of years. Be absolutely clear about how much that's going to cost and what the impact is on your beneficiaries. Write up a proposal, go through that grant giving foundations book, or digitally or from the library. You know, an old copy is not a bad copy as long as it's not 10 years old. Make preliminary calls, have a conversation with grants and foundations before you make an application. They want to give their money away. That is their modus operandi. They have no reason other than being. So they want to hear from people who are looking to use their money wisely and build a relationship with the decision maker in that grant and foundation. And if it feels like a very large, like the PPL or Comic Relief or anything like that, there are still people in there who are there ready to help you, and they're the ones you need to make connections with. So don't, go for the obvious ones that are connected with your cause. If you love cats and work with cats, don't go to foundations that's there to set up for dogs, because it's pointless. And I say that to make a point, because the blanket approach is the worst thing you can do. It will give you personally and your charity a bad name.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. Another question coming through on the chat here. So we have a new patron that would like to formally announce to our supporters in a social media position. I think that means on social media. When and how is the best way to make such an announcement? And that's from Carolina.
Generally before the weekend, but it does depend on if that person has followers. When do they generally post? If they don't have followers, it's when do you generally post, because your own people will be looking out for activity, and then they'll be excited to read your news. And congratulations, getting a new patron is never easy. So consider what that person's habits on social media are, and also who you're targeting by telling this information. I think it's important that you don't expect everybody to be as excited as you are about the patron. But if you believe they're going to make a difference, then try to wrap some message about what it is that the patron has got involved in for. What was their motivation? Do they have an empathy with your cause? Do they have a child with the same condition? Do they love cats? Whatever it is, get into that message, the reason why that person's come involved, and to some extent what they're going to do for you. We're looking forward to welcoming Jo Swinhoe at future gala events, or Jo Swinhoe is going to write a regular blog on the life of her cat, or whatever it is, because then people go, oh, I'm going to hear a bit more about that person. That's going to be really interesting. Or do share with your friends. Jo would love to know why you support the charity. Jo wouldn't, obviously. You don't want to tell your patron all those things, but they come in, and it's part of the building of the relationship with your patron. And I would go with the weekend on a Sunday evening, or in line with your previous social media habits or the patron's social media habits.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. Another question here. So is there any resource I can find for companies for CSR information, especially with respect to companies that support a charity of the year? So is there anywhere specifically you might be able to find that information?
Do you know, I'm not sure, to be honest. No, I'm gonna have to ask a friend.
Yeah.
I have a horrible feeling that it's one of these things that one learns through custom and experience, or looking on websites and phoning people up. I don't think there's a central resource. So if anyone on this call knows of a central resource, please let me know. But otherwise, it would be looking at your target companies, because remember, not all companies are going to be right for your cause. I'll come back to the purpose of your being, and some connection with the companies you're speaking to, and then look on their website, look up CSR. If it's not obvious, phone the CSR person up, make an introduction, say something nice, start to make that best friend alliance with them. And by the time you get to pitch, they'll already be feeling good about you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. And I think we've got time for one last question to squeeze in, if that's okay. So quite an interesting one here. So we are finding that there are a significant number of people who are engaged, donated through a one-off campaign, but have not given permission for us to further contact. If people are engaged enough to give a gift, how do you improve those conversions permission rates so that you can start to build a long-term relationship?
Yeah, it is tricky. I mean, if you've asked the question and they don't want to be contacted directly again, then the only way you're going to find them is by going back down the same route. I would think about, again, testing where you're putting the permissions. Is it too high or too low, or is it after the donation? Try to think what their thought process is as they're going through any form filling that's required, or if it's a cash donor to a cashless machine, make it as simple as possible. You know, we'd love to keep you informed of our work and possibly tell you how we've used this very generous gift of £20, and then you show them the form. They have to opt in, and there's no getting round that. So if they haven't opted in, that's the rules, that's the law, you can't break it. But I do think testing where you put your opt-ins and is worth doing. I have seen them right at the top, and you know, I haven't even read, I'm not engaged yet, so why would I want to say I want to be involved in that? Or they come up as a flash screen, you know, do you want to hear more? I'm going, I haven't read anything yet. I mean, to be fair, they tend to be companies and I just go no anyway, but I do think that we need to be thinking about where somebody is in the right mindset to say yes.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you very much, Jo. I really appreciate it. Really answered all those great questions. Hope everyone had a really enjoyable time. And I will hand back to Neil now. Thank you so much.
I just want to say one thing. Somebody asked what I meant by the Thursday Club. I mean this thing, the first Thursday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't articulate it very well, but I was referring to this first Thursday.
Thank you for the plug, Jo. Jo, thank you very much for such an inspiring, truly inspiring talk. It's such a breadth of and range of practical and solid information and advice for people.
Pleasure.
Really appreciate it very, very much. And thanks again. Thank you, First Thursday team, for producing today's event as usual. And just like to say, next month we have Howard Lake and Lucy Gower in discussion about where fundraising will be in the next 5 to 10 years. And as Jo mentioned, we have grants and trusts meeting discussion in May. That just leaves me to thank our sponsors, Eden Brown once again, and to all of you for devoting time this morning and for your excellent questions. Very good day, and thank you. Bye-bye.